Well, good day, everybody. We'll make a start. Welcome to our penultimate webinar of season 2. Today, we're going to be talking about asset management planning for critical infrastructure. My name is Chris Roberts. I am the Senior Vice President for Asset Management with WSP USA. I'm also the Deputy President of the Institute of Asset Management. With me today is Tiffany Batak. Tiffany, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good day, everyone. My name is Tiffany Batak. I'm an Assistant Vice President and Asset Management Principal Consultant based in the United States. My primary focus is in strategic asset management and have focused much of the last 15 years on issues specifically related to the intersection of asset management and resilience.
Thank you, Tiffany. So today we're going to be talking about asset management planning. WSP provides support to asset owners and managers across the globe to improve performance, reduce risks, manage costs, and help organizations meet their goals and objectives and their customer levels of service. We want to share some of this insight with you today as we look at the landscape of asset management planning. We're going to focus a little bit on the USA and start to think about its evolution. We want to focus on the USA because we recognize that the transit industries in the United States will be looking to update their asset management plans over the course of the next 18 months. And so there will be a review of that or a review of the existing plans in a moment or two. But it is important to note that what we're promoting here today in this presentation is very much applicable to non-transit sectors such as utilities. It's very much applicable to asset owners in other geographic regions as well. I think what we found through 2020 is some of the opportunities for change within society really come down to how we manage our assets and how we provide services with our assets. So with that in mind, we really plan describing some of the basics of asset management, just make sure that we're all on the same page. We're going to explore the maturity of existing asset management plans. And as I said, we're really going to focus on the US transit asset management plans that were produced over the last couple of years. We're going to look at the immediate improvements that can be made. And then we're going to provide some thoughts on what we're referring to as TAM 2.0, which is that next evolution of asset management planning that helps us consider the challenges of the moment and helps us drive plans that provide asset investments to support society in the response and recovery from 2020. So before we jump into the presentation here, we did want to engage with you first. So I'm going to let Tiffany just explain what we'd like to do.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. So before we dive in, we'd like to explore a few brief questions with you to help us better address the varying contexts and motivations for updating your asset management plans. So I would like you to, if you could, please log into www.menti.com. That's MENTI.com, either on your computer or your mobile device. And when asked for the session code, if you could type in 6230 566. It's also located on that same code is up there at the top of the screen that you see. So just a few questions. And the first one, have you written, perhaps yourself, or has your agency developed an asset management plan? So go ahead and select on your screen either yes, no, or maybe you haven't yet, but you're considering it, or not yet completed, but it's underway. So just give it a few moments here. And looks like majority, at least as of now, so we've got 43% of respondents have not yet developed an asset management plan. We'll see if this changes. Okay, great. About split. Oh, and that number is going up. About 44% of you are saying yes, you have. So let's move on to the next question. Now, for those of you that have developed a plan, how often do you update your asset management plan? So go ahead and select on your screen whether that's annually, if it's every 2 years, every 3 to 4 years, or maybe you have one but you haven't yet updated it. Okay, great. And think we're slowing down here. So about 50% haven't yet updated it. And the last question, what is your motivation for updating your asset management plan? Is it to meet regulatory requirements or maybe plan for changes as a result of the pandemic? Is it to prepare for anticipated changes in climate, extreme weather, or other natural disasters? Um, is your motivation to achieve equity goals, or perhaps even advance the maturity of your asset management program? Or is it, you could also select other if it's to address another driver that's not currently listed there. We'll just give it a couple more moments here. So a little bit more than 30% reporting to meet regulatory requirements, whereas over 50% the motivation is advancing asset management program maturity. Well, this is great because as asset management is about extracting value from your assets, I'm going to actually turn it back over to Chris to explain how we can use asset management planning to deliver on certain goals and objectives.
Thanks, Tiffany. Hopefully I'm back on the screen. Yes, I am. Yep. Okay, so let's move on then. So what we thought we'd do just to get everybody on the same page was just talk a little bit about asset management to begin with. Just get, as I said, just go back to the basics, get everybody on the same page. Appreciate for many of you here, this is familiar territory. But I think it's worth sort of just acknowledging that despite modern definitions of asset management having been around now for several decades, there is still a widely held view that what we're talking about in terms of doing things right and doing the right things is really what I would refer to as a maintenance plus definition. We're not talking about that. Asset management is very much more than this. As Tiffany just indicated, it's the practices relating to extracting value from our assets. So by that, I mean identifying the value proposition, understanding the assets necessary to deliver that value proposition, and then identifying the activities necessary to enable the assets to perform. So for social infrastructure, that's what we were talking about on this webinar, transportation, utilities, education, healthcare, you know what I'm talking about there. The value proposition is typically represented by services to society. We define the organization goals and the customer levels of service, and then identify and maintain the asset performance necessary to deliver that service. And we do that throughout the asset's life cycle. It's important to understand that the way we deliver asset management focuses not just on doing things right, but also doing the right things and setting the right objectives for the assets and for the organization. The international standard for asset management, ISO 55001, summarizes this concept as a line of sight. And we've got another webinar that we did earlier in this season that talked about ISO 55001. So this golden thread really enables us to optimize our work efforts to deliver the services needed. This is not just about maintaining, as I said, but rather about having that long-term plan in place, an asset management plan in place for what services we want to provide and how we plan to provide them. Tiffany, over to you to talk about TAM 1.0.
So in the US transportation sector, this recognition of need for a long-term plan was included in the FAST Act. Under 49 Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, Part 625, the requirement, which came into effect in 2016, required all transit agencies to develop a TAM plan by October 2018. It's a plan that considered the capital asset inventory, the condition and performance of that inventory, the ways and means for prioritizing investments and making decisions on the assets, the project-based activities on the assets and the asset management activities, the resource needs for the plan, and a plan for monitoring the plan. From our experience, while most agencies satisfied the requirement for producing an asset management plan, not necessarily all satisfied the intent.
So some of the specific gaps that we saw in the TAM plans, I've captured here: incomplete asset data, or poor understanding of the actual state of the asset, a poor understanding of the size or scale of the state of good repair backlog, and a poor understanding of the level investment needed in the assets, what we would refer to as a steady state need. Some plans, many plans, had poor alignment to the resource needs to implement the plan. So we set out what work was necessary, but we'd not captured the resources needed to deliver that work. And many plans really lacked an alignment to the organization's goals and objectives. A big gap for me was risk, and that's at the heart of ISO 55001. Many of the plans that we've reviewed had no consideration of risks, either asset or asset management risks. This really does therefore miss the intent of the asset management plan, as Tiffany was saying, and the use of deterioration models to analyze and evaluate assets and determine the best course of action is also worthy of mention as for improvement. I think deterioration models really require a more complete data set, and with that being a gap, it's obviously difficult to utilize those, but they do provide a much better view of the backlog and the steady state needs. I think the opportunity that is available to us all is best presented as an example, and I'm using the Amtrak Engineering Asset Management Plan here as an example. We were involved with that, and it is available online at the Amtrak website. So I'm not sharing anything here that's not freely available. But that work that we undertook there provided the start of the alignment to the organization's goals. It provided an alignment between the infrastructure need to the services that Amtrak provide, obviously the transportation services that they provide. It demonstrated an understanding of state of good repair. It's still obviously a process that's under development, but it's at least laid out an understanding of where they are today. A backlog of 33 billion, so not a small backlog, and an annual investment need of around 1.2 billion. Or 2.5 times the current investment levels. So the plan that was developed for Amtrak resulted in an immediate increase, doubling of investment over the next 5 years, which really was down to that plan communicating and justifying why additional effort and additional investment needed to be made in the infrastructure, and showing that connection back to the organization's goals and objectives, showing that alignment and identifying the risks for both the assets and the asset management that would result if we did not indeed undertake that level of investment. The TAM plan itself, there's benefits associated with that. I'm going to let Tiffany walk through those now.
So the benefits really come from the process of developing the plan rather than the plan itself. And as Chris demonstrated in his example, the TAM plan will pull together key information on what assets you have and what state they are in now, how do you use and maintain them, and ultimately, how are they performing versus how you want them to be performing. This information gives us the ability to predict how assets might behave or fail in the future. Now, think decay curves. which gives us information we need to identify impacts of different investment scenarios to help us prioritize TAM activities and projects. Ultimately, with better data and information, we can make improved decisions about how we are managing our assets over their life to ensure we are really using every dollar as wisely as possible and are able to justify funding requirements to deliver safe, reliable service at the required or target levels.
So while the plans developed to date, I should say, represent a good start, there is more that can be done. And I quote General Patton, a good plan today is better than a great plan tomorrow. As Tiffany noted, the value really comes from undertaking the planning and improving that process each time rather than the actual plan itself. And in fact, a Government Accountability Office in the United States, the GIO, undertook an audit in September, or published an audit in September 2020, that reported that few, if any, of the agencies had implemented changes to current processes and procedures to satisfy TAM planning requirements, and recommended implementing a program of improvement in the short term. The fact that so many of you are utilizing TAM planning to drive advancing your asset management as a program of improvement is really good to see. So how you improve your asset management planning and how you should start that with a maturity assessment and driving that forward. That will be the subject of our final webinar on Thursday this week. It's also worth just thinking about the process of undertaking an asset management plan. If the value really comes from the planning process itself and not the plan, then it's critical to embed that process into business as usual practices. That doesn't happen overnight. From our experience introducing more frequent and regular updates, reviews and improvements of the TAM plan, or more correctly, applying the asset management planning process more frequently, will enable more rapid improvement of the asset management practices within the organization. It means we're moving away from ticking the requirements box to demonstrating that we meet the intent, but also enabling us to respond to the findings of the GIO. From our experience, it typically takes 3 to 4 TAM planning cycles to firmly embed asset management planning into business as usual practices. So at the current frequency within the US transit industry, that could be 12 to 16 years compared to the 3 to 4 years if we were to move to an annual review cycle. And as we've seen elsewhere, a fourfold increase in asset management adoption can really come about through more frequent asset management planning, where we're embedding those processes, those asset management planning processes, into business as usual. And of course, we've all seen so much change this year that it is very much worthy spending the time now and updating your plans for next year, and continuing to review your plans and update them on an annual basis, because we will see ongoing change over the next few years, particularly with changes in use and changes in funding. So with those interim improvements that we'd identified earlier to the version 1 plan, identifying the state of good repair, identifying the steady state needs, let's look at what we think should be a focus for TAM 2.0. For us, the next evolution of the TAM plan really needs to prepare us for the future. At WSP, our Future Ready program is about designing with tomorrow's infrastructure needs in mind. And as we look to the future, and for transit agencies, we look to that deadline in October 2022, we need to better plan and respond to the issues of the moment. The concept of TAM 2.0 is both about understanding the asset capabilities, so thinking about the state of your assets and how they will deteriorate, thinking about risks and vulnerabilities, and putting in place plans to prepare your agency for the future, and considering the broader context within which we operate assets, including our interface with climate change, with equity and social justice, with societal health and well-being, as well as thinking about the economic growth and sustainability over the next couple of years. In organizations with well-developed asset management capabilities, it's possible to ensure that the asset's technical levels of service support an organization's goals, including, for example, social justice. And we're going to talk about each of these over the course of the next couple of slides. From an asset management viewpoint, it's not just about ensuring our organizations are adopting fairer practices, and it's not just about ensuring our asset management plans deliver and tick the box, but it's also about making sure that they help the services that we're providing to society in the short, medium, and long term.
In terms of climate change, there are some good practice examples of how this is being progressed already. This is an example from MARTA to showcase how to mitigate climate change risks and integrate into asset management plans. So at MARTA, WSP worked to integrate climate change vulnerabilities into the agency's overall asset management system, identifying opportunities to integrate climate change adaptation down to the asset class level. This really enabled the development of adaptation strategies for each climate impact by asset area and address the greatest climate impacts to asset operations, which were higher extreme temperatures for longer periods of time and higher intensity precipitation and storms. The work also enabled the determination of a climate vulnerability index for different assets in the system, a function of how susceptible an asset is to particular climate impact, used alongside other data, such as condition, for example, to prioritize their capital projects.
Equity and social justice has obviously been something that's been in the headlines this year. And of course, asset management plans can support that. To give you some examples, King County up in Washington State established the Fair and Just Ordinance in 2010. And the county's strategic plan identifies the specific actions to meet 14 determinants of equity, the conditions that each of us need to thrive. In 2017, King County's Water and Land Resources Division launched the Equity and Social Justice Map, developed to allow employees to access and view census and demographic data within a geographic context for their projects, programs, and general reporting. This tool is now widely available across the county, and the strategic plan provides the direction to serve all residents and help eliminate inequities. WSP are currently working with King County Metro to integrate this thinking into their TAM planning process to ensure equity and social justice is a prime consideration in project prioritization. Another example related to that region focuses on the strategies that impact well-being. If 2020 has shown us anything, it is that we need to consider health and well-being. And by well-being, I don't just mean mental health and physical health, but also thinking about the environmental well-being, which of course can have an impact on one's health as well. From an asset management point of view, we can have a very positive impact on well-being. I will give you two examples. The first is a little bit more obvious, and that's the related to the services that we provide. So a focus on risk, we can improve the safe use and resilience of assets. Through good planning, we can improve access to services and opportunities, whether it's transit services to community facilities like schools and healthcare or what have you, or improved financial well-being through access to jobs. We can also introduce strategies to reduce environmental impact that positively support better health. For example, the targeted deployment of electric bus fleets to network areas where there is poor air quality, as indicated on this map. The second example, or the second angle to well-being, is not always as well considered. And that is the positive impact on our staff. So asset management is about managing risks and having a planned approach to achieving objectives. Planned means we understand our expectations and can improve predictability. It also means we're better able to do our jobs, which in turn has a positive impact on well-being. You may think this is a bit of a stretch, but there is research now that suggests that workplace well-being can be improved through a management systems approach. And that's not research that's conducted by the likes of ISO and others that sell management systems. It's actually research that's being conducted independently by a number of medical institutes. Back to you, Tiffany. Sorry.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Having a planning framework in place and establishing plans means that we're able to respond to the risks and challenges of 2020 and move forward. An important lesson from the 2008 global financial crisis was the role infrastructure investment can play in boosting economic development. Shovel-ready projects are candidate projects for economic stimulus, which immediately impact the national economy. However, a key lesson from 2008 was ensuring an adequate list of projects to maintain stimulus and sustain economic recovery. It is therefore important to have planning-ready projects in place also. Planning-ready projects have a deferred impact on the economy, and the combined approach provides for a sustained recovery in the short to medium term. Now, as mentioned earlier, asset management provides that connection or line of sight from our organization goals and objectives through to asset activities. High-performing asset management organizations have plans in place of the work needed to deliver services in the short, medium, and long term, and are therefore in a stronger position to support sustained recovery. Importantly, they are also in a better position to ensure that both shovel and planning-ready projects add value to the organization and therefore to society at large. So the planning process is a fundamental element of asset management and enables you to manage today's challenges while preparing for tomorrow's opportunities and risks. It really is about making you both immediate ready as well as future ready. 2020 in particular has presented a number of unprecedented challenges for asset owners and managers worldwide, and in many industry sectors, the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly impacted revenue and operations. Economic challenges have resulted in changing investment criteria, resulting in the need for update to existing plans, and importantly, for several organizations, a fresh look at equity goals and objectives. As we look forward into 2021 and the years following, even if your next regulatory update may not be for, let's say, 2 or more years, it's the perfect time to review your plans now and consider what improvements can be made that support your recovery planning efforts and to help you build resilience to future changes. Remember that the benefits of the asset management plan are not necessarily in the plan itself, but in the planning process. Make sure that it's not just a plan that sits on the shelf, so to speak, but a living document that is used to leverage asset data and guides the implementation of coordinated activity needed across operations, maintenance, capital investment planning for both normal and emergency situations in the short and long term. And if your organization is looking to increase the rate at which it matures its asset management practice, consider the frequency that you revisit your plan, as it can take several cycles, perhaps 3 to 4 is what we've mentioned earlier, to fully embed asset management planning into business as usual. The concept of TAMP 2.0 is both about understanding the asset capabilities, risks, and vulnerabilities, and putting plans and resources in place to prepare your agency for the future while considering the broader context we operate assets in, including our interface with climate change, social equity, societal health and well-being, and economic sustainability.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. So with that, we're going to move to questions. We're going to hold the line open for another 10 minutes or so. While we get some questions in here, if you do have a question, you can use the chat facility within the GoToWebinar panel. I do have some questions which I'm going to come to in a moment. I do just want to let people know that we do have our final webinar in this season on Thursday this week, and that is on asset management maturity, and it's a case study with the UK local roads. It's a very interesting case study because we've compared agencies across the UK with very different sizes of asset portfolios. With that, let me go to our first question. I'll read it out, Tiffany, and then you can have a think. How does global asset owners react to cushion the financial impact due to COVID-19 pandemic? Do we reduce, defer? Is there anything that we can do for right sizing?
That's a great question. There's a few trends that come to mind. I think one of the biggest trends in service changes or in services really changes according to the demand, and focusing on services for essential workers and vulnerable populations. We're also seeing many agencies, especially transportation agencies, taking advantage of low traffic volumes to accelerate capital works. And on that note, some of those, or several of those agencies actually are leveraging their TAM plan and the data from the TAM plan to identify capital project efficiencies. So for example, where they can piggyback and add, additional maintenance needs or address rehabilitation needs in existing capital projects. Also identifying planning-ready projects in preparation for stimulus funding. Just a couple of other thoughts. In terms of additional actions that are being taken, I know that there's also resource sharing that's happening across agencies and even across borders. So whether that means sharing equipment or even human resources. So for example, we're also seeing even abroad where they're locally seconding staff as a result of reduced travel and quarantine restrictions in the current environment. And of course, many agencies and businesses are also pivoting their service delivery models. For example, some of the ride-sharing services, and I'm just speaking specifically for transportation, but for ride-sharing, they're moving towards scooters, for example, in active transportation modes. Chris, I don't know if you want to maybe add a few thoughts to that.
I think my only thought would be is if you have an asset management plan in place that is connected to your organization goals, your customer service levels, your ability to change how you manage those assets so that it is continuing to be aligned to shifts and changes in your organizations or in your customer service levels, then you people with plans in place have that ability to react quicker is I guess what I'm trying to say. And so I think it is important to think about putting those plans in place now. I don't think there is a one size fits all approach. I don't think we should just start reducing and deferring, etc. But this is an opportunity to start thinking about maybe doing some right sizing, maybe thinking about reducing some services and then bringing them on in stages and using that downtime, as Tiffany said, to catch up on some capital investment work. But I think it does come down to having that plan in place. Second question, beyond the minimal federal requirements, what are the most important questions that a TAM plan should answer? That's a good question. Any initial thoughts on that, Tiffany?
So in terms of, well, maybe some important questions that a TAM plan can answer, maybe ask yourself if, do my investments accurately reflect my priorities and the technical levels of service required to deliver on those priorities, especially as those priorities may be changing in this year and in the near term. A few other questions I would consider, is my plan just compliant, or am I able to leverage the data to make better decisions, both in the immediate and longer term that can account for emerging trends, even the ones that we had mentioned on the webinar today that help build resilience? And do I have the right asset information? For example, do I know my asset risks and how will it impact the system? How how is condition defined and measured? And do I know the level of resources it takes to maintain maybe a certain type of assets in a state of good repair?
Good answer. I think I'd add to that the elements that we've talked about here around being future ready, thinking about climate change, resilience, equity and social justice, etc. Okay, I've got two other questions here that have come in that are somewhat related, so I'll take this. The first one is, what major asset management framework components are up to change to address pandemic and equity problems? And the second is, if we do all of this COVID-19 thing again, I would rather hope we wouldn't do it again, but who knows? But if we do all this again, what would be good to do differently? I think just in summary, I would say there is an awful lot that I think agencies can do differently, not just related to what we've presented today, but thinking about having continuity of operations plans in place, thinking about that business continuity, making sure that we've got a solid understanding of our assets, so that we know the state of those assets, we know which assets are ready for deployment in an emergency situation, etc., and which assets we need to continue to keep a high level of maintenance and intervention on. The plan obviously helps with all of that, but so does having asset information and a solid management system, a set of controls for how we manage things, including an understanding of risk. We've covered a lot of that within the first webinar in this series, which was very much about how asset management can help you respond to COVID-19. So I would encourage you to go to the website at the bottom of this screen, and you will see the links to those webinars on our website. They're hosted on our website. I think we've got time for one final question, so we'll take this one, Tiffany. I think use of deterioration curves in asset models and calibrating to agency history of work / cold weather environmental impacts. What's the end of that question? Sorry, scroll down. Oh, that is the end of the question. So use of deterioration curves in asset models and calibrating to agency history of work / cold weather environmental impacts. I think the question here is really around how do you use them. I think one of the things that we've found with the work that we've done is you really do need a reasonable level of data and information about your assets in order to utilize deterioration models and use those to support prediction of levels of maintenance or capital replacement. Most of the work that we've done in that space has been, I suppose, I would define it as mixed from the sort of the more sort of asset portfolio type model, which is looking at the number of assets that you've got, projecting forwards based on use and operation. The work that we did for Amtrak, for example, looked at assets and the different types of use of those assets. So whether it was on a higher speed line, whether it was in what the operational constraints were on that line, and then use that to determine the future need for asset replacement. We didn't take into account the changing environment, but that was largely because most of the assets we looked at were within the Northeast corridor, and of course the weather impacts are fairly consistent across that. But I do recognize that for agencies and organizations that have multiple assets dispersed over a much larger geographic region, that it is necessary to take into account those cold weather aspects and other environmental aspects. One of the things we found at Amtrak, for example, was certain assets in certain areas along the line did deteriorate quicker because of the immediate environment within which that asset was operating, whether it was near a particular industrial unit or whatever. I think it's important we do that. I think it comes from understanding the history of how that asset has behaved, how it's deteriorated, and I think it's capturing that history associated with information about the current state of the asset and using that to develop deterioration curves and project forwards. I think for most organizations that we've worked with, the real challenge right now, the thing that they should be immediately focused on is building up that asset inventory, building up the current state of the asset, and then capturing that asset history in order to develop those deterioration curves. One last question that I will take is here from one of my new colleagues at golder.com. Where do you see connections between operational risk management, environment, health and safety, data management, and asset management? I think we've covered a lot of that today. I do think there is a huge interface between what we describe as future ready. So thinking about how we design and build things that are not just fit for today, but are fit for the future and help with things like mental health and well-being in society that respond to climate change, respond to resilience, or build in resilience to enable response to climate change. I think having an understanding of our risk helps that. I also think having a solid understanding of the environment and the environment within which that asset is operating is important. And of course, one of the things that we found, and we talked about this in an earlier webinar on ISO 55000, is the key benefit, one of the key benefits of asset management is putting in place those controls so that we are managing those assets effectively. And when we put controls in place, we are able to reduce health and safety incidents by, in some industry sectors, reported up to 3 times in a decrease in health and safety incidents, which is significant. So I do think there's a real interface, a very real interface between what we do around environment and climate change, what we're doing around health and safety, emergency management, and really using all our information to better prepare organizations for the future. Do you want to add anything to either of those questions, Tiffany, before we close?
No, I thought those were great responses. I agree with them. Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. We will call it time there. If you do have any questions, any further questions, please reach out to myself or Tiffany. Our phone numbers and email are on the screen there. Without anything further to add, I wish you all well. Have a good season's greetings to everyone. And I look forward to you attending one of our future webinars. We have one on Thursday, as I said, and we'll be running a season 3 in 2021. Thank you.